Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn and Kathleen. And thank you for hosting the Wolf Conservation Center for the program today. We're very excited to come to you all. And we were actually just right down the road. So someone had asked earlier if we are live right now. Yes, we are. So the Wolf Conservation Center is located in South Salem, New York, and we're right off of Route 35. But just like the library has been impacted by the pandemic and programming has been altered and moved mainly to Zoom, the Wolf Conservation Center is doing the same thing as well. So we are open for very limited programming on our website, which is nywolf.org. So if anyone would like to learn more, certainly visit that website as well. But many of our programs have been switched to virtual programs. And we're so fortunate that we have wolves here that we can connect to people online, because as was mentioned, really teaching people about wolves and connecting people to them is really at the heart of our mission, because education and dispelling a lot of misinformation about wolves is really crucial to protecting them and ensuring they have a really great future ahead. So during today's program, we are going to see our 3 ambassador wolves. If you logged on a bit early, you would have seen them moving back and forth along this fence. And we'll potentially see some red wolves and Mexican gray wolves as well throughout the program. But these wolves represent just a fraction of the wolves that live here at our center. We are actually home to a total of 39 wolves. And while that might sound like a lot, it's actually not our largest population. We actually had over 50 wolves living here a few years ago. But because we participate in 2 recovery programs, wolves do move from our center to other facilities that participate in those same programs. But ultimately, the main goal is for some of our wolves to be released into the wild and to really help repopulate and rebalance ecosystems, either out west for Mexican gray wolves or down south for red wolves. But we'll talk more about that later in the program. For now, we have 3 ambassador wolves here that I would like to introduce you to. Now, before we kind of fully get into meeting these wolves, I just want to explain a bit more about why we have these wolves here. So our ambassador wolves are gray wolves, and gray wolves are the most common type or common species of wolf in the entire world. They're found in North America, but they're also found in Europe and Asia as well. So pretty much all across the Northern Hemisphere. And they used to be quite wide ranging in the United States as well. In fact, wolves lived in every single state except for Hawaii. But as European settlers arrived hundreds of years ago, they brought with them ideas that wolves were scary and dangerous, and they began killing wolves. And this pattern of persecution continued over the years, and unfortunately is still going on today. Many states have hunting seasons or are trying to begin hunting wolves again. And so we feel it's quite important to really serve as representatives for wolves and use our voices to make the wild a safer place for them. And these 3 ambassador wolves that we have here also serve as representatives for wolves the public can so rarely see. And that's because we don't actually have any wild wolves living in this area. In fact, the last wild wolf to permanently live in New York State was killed in the 1890s, and we've not had a permanent population here since. And so for many people, if they're not seeing an animal, it's not really part of their focus. They're not really trying to save them because they don't know too much about them, or they just don't feel a connection. And luckily, our ambassador wolves are here to connect people to wolves in the wild. Now, these 3 wolves will live at our center for their entire life. They were actually born at a facility much like ours out west and came to live with us when they were just a few weeks old, and they are considered to be socialized. They're not tame, they're not domesticated. However, they've lost their fear of people. And that's essential for these programs, because if you were to visit on site, they would be coming right up to the fence. They're quite curious, but they're also very different in that sense from wild wolves. Wild wolves are very elusive and very shy. And if they were to see a human in the wild, they'd probably turn and run in the other direction because they know we can be dangerous. They know we can be scary. But we realized if we wanted to connect people to wolves, they had to see them. So without further ado, I will introduce you to our 3 ambassador wolves. I'm actually going to move behind the camera so I can bring you closer to the wolves. And I did want to note, if you have questions throughout the program, feel free to use the chat feature to type your questions in, and I can monitor the chat as we go throughout to answer any questions that might pop up. We'll also have a designated question and answer portion at the very end of the program as well. So if you think of questions, definitely either write them down on your end or put them in the chat. And those are also a really great way for me to gauge interest levels. And so I can tailor my discussion to things you might be most interested in. So I'm going to move behind the camera and we're going to go meet Zephyr, one of our ambassador wolves. Now you'll notice we do have all of our wolves living in a big fenced in, well, they're not all in this enclosure, but we do have fences here. All of our wolves are living in large, spacious enclosures, and these enclosures range from about 1 acre to 2.5 acres in size. And this enclosure right here is home to our 3 ambassador wolves. And you'll see 2 of them right in front of you. Zephyr is standing on the rock. Zephyr is a gray wolf, and he is turning 10 in April, which might sound like a pretty young age, especially compared to humans. But 10 for wolves is actually very impressive. In the wild, their average lifespan is usually only around 4 to 6 years. Of course, some wolves might live a bit longer. Unfortunately, many live much shorter lives than those 4 to 6 years. But in centers like ours, we find that wolves can actually live to be upwards of 16 years old. They are, and you'll see Alewa, Zephyr's sister, just jumped up on front of the rock as well. But wolves are, when they're given food, when they're not, or when food is readily available, I should say, when they're not actively encountering rival families of wolves, they're not encountering humans that might try to harm them, they can live much longer, much safer lives. So Alewa is standing on the rock as well. Alewa is Zephyr's litter mate. So they are the same age and they have the same parents. So she will also be turning 10 in April. But you'll notice she is quite different in appearance from Zephyr. She has more of a blonde outer coat, whereas Zephyr had that dark black and gray outer coat. And that is very similar to hair color for people. So it's not meant really to illustrate much else. It's just their genetics. But it is also quite important because that coat acts like a rain jacket. So Alewa will have that outer coat on her entire life, and it will work to repel water away from her skin. But you might be noticing as well that these wolves are panting quite a bit today. Earlier, we were discussing how beautiful it was, how, we're all hoping to go for walks later today and really enjoy being outside. Because for us, this is the first sign that spring is really on its way. And these wolves have known that spring is coming because they actually will experience hormonal changes in their bodies based on day length. So as our days have been getting a bit longer, wolves have been kind of preparing for the onset of really warm spring and summer weather. They actually experience an increase in their prolactin hormones. And so they will start to shed their winter coats. So right now, these wolves are quite toasty because they not only have on their outer coat, but they also have on their winter undercoat. And that undercoat is very thick and insulating, and it allows wolves to live in temperatures below -50 degrees Fahrenheit. So while it's getting close to 60 degrees today, you can imagine these wolves are slightly uncomfortable. So they are resting quite a bit. They're staying in the shade. And over the next few weeks, they will start to shed. They'll start to lose their undercoat. And if you were to visit us later in the summer, you would see the exact same wolves, but they would look very different in their appearance. And that's because they would have lost that really thick undercoat layer. These wolves have another wolf that lives with them. He's just out of view right now, but you would have seen him earlier before the program officially started. And that wolf is their younger brother, and his name is Nikai. Now, Nikai is going to turn 7 in April. These wolves have different birth dates. So Nikai was born on April 13th. Zephyr and Alewa were born on April 20th. But
all wolves are born in the spring months. So winter, late winter, so January, February, sometimes even going into early March, is considered to be breeding season for wolves. And their gestation period, or how long they're pregnant, is about 62 to 63 days. So usually you'll see wolves being born in April and May. So a lot of our wolves here overlap on birthdays. So if anyone watching has an April or May birthday, feel free to visit our website to see if you might share a birthday with one of our wolves here. Now, looking at their enclosure, you'll notice it is quite spacious. As I mentioned earlier, it's 2.5 acres in size, but this is nowhere near as large as a wolf territory would be in the wild. So wolves that live in the wild occupy areas of land called territories, and each territory is kind of specific to a family or a pack. And a family of wolves in the wild would be mom and dad, and then children that they might have, children of varying years, and then maybe some aunts and uncles that stay with them as well. But at its core, a wolf family is very similar to ours. They live together, they work together to find food, they'll protect each other, and most importantly, they do love each other as well. We saw some really great communication between Alewa and Nikai before the program started, some tail wagging, some nuzzling, and then some growling. But I think we all can witness that in our family lives as well. We love each other, but sometimes you just get too close to a sibling, and it can be a little too much for them. So we do try to keep this enclosure as wild as possible. That means we do give the wolves a lot of trees, grass, rocks. We don't do much in terms of grounds maintenance in this area. But we do also have a lot of man-made structures in here that are meant to mimic what they would have in the wild. So you'll notice in the very right-hand side of your screen, there's a big rock structure with a hole in the middle of it, and that's actually a wolf den. We did build that. I don't think a wolf den in the wild would be quite as nice in structure, not quite as defined, but that den is quite strong and very sturdy. And we did that really by design because we have a lot of strong winds around here, summer storms, winter snowstorms, and with all of our trees, we can get some limbs falling down. And so we wanted the wolves to have a really safe and secure place to go should they wish to get out of the severe weather. These dens are also very nice actually in the warmer summer days because they're a bit cooler on the inside. But as a bonus, you can actually watch the wolves if they're sleeping in their dens. We have cameras in all of our wolf dens. So we have 8 occupied wolf enclosures on site, and every den has a camera. And these cameras are accessible to the public through our website, which is nywolf.org. And it's a great way to continue to watch these wolves, observe them, and learn from them. Just by watching the cameras. We also have really great activities for kids that are linked to those cameras as well. And they're activity tracking sheets that allow you to learn more about wolf behavior and record which behaviors you observe from the wolves that you're watching. We also, actually, as we're approaching potentially pup season, I should note, we've had puppies born in front of those cameras before. So I really do recommend taking a quick look if you have a chance. We do also have cameras that look at the wolves that are in their enclosure as well. So they're not just den cameras. And if you look back towards the center of the enclosure, you'll notice a very large pond. Now, up until just a few weeks ago, that pond was frozen and the wolves were using it as a place to rest, to nap. They were playing on it. They were bringing their food on top of it. But now it is just water. And in fact, they often prefer to drink from it. It's also a great way for them to stay nice and cool in the summer. Again, I mentioned, even though wolves will shed their undercoats in preparation for summer, they can still get quite warm. And so they will rely on their excellent large paws to help them swim. Wolves have very large paws that in the winter act like snowshoes, but in the spring and summer, they can actually use them as very effective paddles. And so they can be very good at swimming. This pond here is not large enough to really be conducive to much in terms of swimming, but there are wolves that live in the wild, most famously wolves that live along the Pacific coastline of Canada in British Columbia. and they're actually known as coastal wolves or sea wolves because they will swim an island hop along those outer small islands, and they will catch fish and they'll eat crabs and oysters. So they've really adapted to a marine lifestyle. And even though our ambassador wolves here aren't quite as marine in their nature, they do enjoy going for a quick swim. And then something that most likely would never be in a wild wolf territory. These wolves do have a log tower. Actually, every enclosure here does have a log tower structure of some sort. And we've been quite fortunate over the last few years in that many of these structures have actually been built by local scouts as part of scout projects. But it's a really great way to give the wolves a different vantage point. Territories in the wild, as we mentioned earlier, can be quite large, sometimes over 1,000 square miles in size. And a territory of that size would encompass many different landforms. And so wolves might be able to climb up on top of a slight hill, a plateau, and they would be able to see things that are farther away. And so we want these wolves, again, to feel as though they're wild and to mimic the wild as much as possible. So we do give them structures like that. And I did notice one of the questions that came in was about their food, because we do give these wolves a lot of necessary things for survival. We give them shelter, we give them water, but I haven't mentioned food just yet. And the question was whether or not these wolves can hunt on their own. Do we give them live prey? And we certainly can't prevent any animals from getting into their enclosure. We like to say sometimes these animals make poor career choices, and they either climb over the fence, they fly in, turkeys especially, or they can actually cross from branch to branch and make their way into the enclosure. And these wolves will certainly hunt them if they would like. Their hunting instincts are alive and well. In fact, I was actually teaching a program a few years ago to a preschool group. So everyone was about 4 years old, and they were sitting right by the fence, and we were talking about the wolves, and a chipmunk ran through the fence in front of everyone. And about 2 feet away from the fence, Nikai caught it and ate it right in front of the group. So these wolves will definitely kill animals if they would like to. If they're hungry, they can certainly supplement with native animals that wander into these enclosures. But we do give the wolves snacks, and we do give them large meals. And that goes both for our ambassador wolves, who we have in front of us right now, and our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves as well. In fact, these wolves are going to get some snacks right now. And so you'll notice they're very calm, they're very relaxed. Nikai is out of view, Alewa is resting on the rock, and Zephyr is resting up on top of his den. But they are very in tune with my actions. And when I go pick up their snack buckets, you'll notice an immediate change in their behavior. They'll become very excited. They might even start to communicate with each other a bit in the form of growls, maybe some biting as well, as they get so excited for their snacks. But it's a really great way to show feeding patterns, but also to really reward these wolves and thank them for unknowingly serving really important positions at the center for really connecting people to wolves and serving as those representatives. So we always like to thank them in a variety of ways. So I'm going to put the camera back down to allow you to see me feed the wolves, but also give a much wider frame of view. And you'll notice they know something's up. They're already moving, getting very excited. And you'll start to see that even some of these wolves might pop their tails high up in the air. And that can be a sign of excitement, but it can also be a way to show leadership, who's in charge. Although with these three here, all siblings, sometimes they all put their tails up thinking they're all the ones in charge. So I'm going to go grab the bucket of snacks, and then you'll see them get very, very excited. Okay, so these wolves are carnivores, as wolves are. So they eat meat, and these wolves eat a variety of meat. Today, they are getting some venison. So this is deer meat that we've just chopped up into smaller pieces. And this was actually donated to us. We have a really great support system in the local community. You might see our truck driving around sometimes. It's a big white truck
with our logo on the side. And you might even see us picking up roadkill deer with that truck. Roadkill deer is what we feed to our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves, because deer is a natural prey source for wolves. And so for our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves that might be released into the wild, we want them eating food that they can safely find in the wild. And so we feed them an entire carcass of roadkill. Each family of wolves gets that about once a week. And that's a great way for you to help support the center and help support the wolves. If you ever see a deer on the side of the road that's been hit by a car, instead of calling the police, give us a call. We'll go pick it up. The police also call us as well. So if you would prefer to call the police, you can do so knowing they'll reach out to us. But we also receive donations from local hunters, local grocery stores. And so these wolves are actually getting some donations from a local hunter, which is really great. If people have leftover food, they often ask if they can give it to us so we can then use it to feed the wolves. So we actually end up not having to pay very much at all for food for our wolves, which is really amazing, especially with 39 wolves. Now, you did notice some aggression between Zephyr and Nikai. Everyone's really excited for their snack. So I'm going to go ahead and feed these out. And you'll notice there's no real wrong way to feed these wolves. We just try to spread them out so they're not fighting over the exact same piece of food. So it's all going in slightly different places, again, just to make sure everyone's getting roughly the same amount. You'll also notice these wolves are really excellent jumpers, which explains why we have such tall fences. But wolves have really amazingly powerful legs, great for jumping, but also really key for moving and traveling. You'll notice their bodies are quite lean and lanky, and they might appear to be very large, really based on those undercoats, but their average body weight is about 80 pounds per ambassador wolf. So some of you with larger dogs at home might have dogs that are larger than these wolves. But wolves are actually built very similarly to marathon runners, to compare it to people. So usually quite lean, lanky, but very muscular, but also capable of running extremely far distances. And we see that with wolves. Sometimes wolves will travel upwards of 30 miles in one day looking for food, maintaining their territory. So they can travel quite extensively, and those long legs are really key for that. And so that's it for their snacks. You'll notice really once I take this feeding glove off, the bucket goes away. These guys are highly intelligent and they know that means snacks are over. And now you'll see that these wolves are moving all around, trying to find anything they might have missed. We'll see Alewa marking her territory, so peeing. And this is a really great way to illustrate just how amazing their sense of smell is. Wolves can actually smell prey over 1.5 miles away. And so they are going to use their noses to see if there's any leftovers. There's probably not. This wasn't a food that really tends to kind of splatter or break apart. But sometimes if they get items like ground beef or ground turkey, those items can spread out a bit more. And we'll see some communication. You might have noticed that Nikai, who's the wolf in the middle of the screen right now, he is the younger brother and he can often be quite playful, but he also really enjoys kind of getting attention from his siblings. So he'll get very close to them, he'll whimper, he'll whine, he'll wag his tail. And sometimes his siblings are supportive of that and they entertain him, and other times they're not.
Now we'll notice Alewa just peed again, and anyone with a dog at home is very familiar with this behavior, but it's known as scent marking. And it's a way for wolves to kind of delineate their territory in the wild, but also just to claim items as their own. So if they get, a really fun piece of food here or a birthday present, we do celebrate their birthdays. They do receive very fun enrichment items. Sometimes they'll pee on them as a way of kind of letting their siblings know, this is mine, don't take it. We'll also see them scent roll on really stinky items. Again, anyone with dogs at home might be very familiar with this. I know, unfortunately, my dog loves to roll in stinky things like deer poop. So with wolves, really the same thing goes. Usually the smellier, the better. And there's several reasons they might do so. One could be that they've never encountered that scent before and they really like it, so they want to smell like it too. It's also thought to be a way to potentially camouflage their scent. If wolves are hunting in the wild, they're already at a disadvantage. They're going after animals like deer, elk, moose, bison. These animals can be really, 7 to 8 times their size. And so any chance they can get to kind of give themselves a better chance, they'll take it. So it can possibly be a reason for scent rolling as well. And these wolves are now out of frame. They're just grabbing some water. Even though these wolves have a pond that they can use to drink from, we do give them fresh water in a water bucket. And usually in the winter, that water bucket stays heated, so it never actually freezes. And that way they have a nice supply of fresh water year round. And here we have Nikai again, just sniffing, making sure he hasn't missed anything. And I do see we have a question about, whether or not these wolves leave the property. And I think anyone who maybe has been in this area for a few years might be familiar with our, we used to have an ambassador wolf traveling program. And so we had an ambassador wolf named Atka, who was an Arctic gray wolf, and he would actually travel, and he would go to local libraries, museums, and even actually went down to Congress a few times. And he would help connect people to wolves, people that weren't able to make it physically to our center. And we did actually retire our ambassador program or traveling program in 2016. So we don't have any ambassador wolves that leave the property. So they will stay here in this enclosure for their life. But we do have other wolves that live here, red wolves and Mexican gray wolves, that will sometimes leave our facility to go travel to another facility. Or they might be very lucky and leave our center to go be released into the wild, which is the ultimate dream of ours. But these ambassador wolves will stay here forever. And they appear to be alert about something. And sometimes it's something, sometimes it's nothing, but they're very in tune with their surroundings here. Again, very similar to wolves in the wild. They need to be alert and aware of what's going on because it could mean life or death, especially for wolves right now and the challenges they're facing. They often, the more alert they are, the better they are. And a question from Evan about feeding. So some of you might have noticed that when these wolves were being fed, one of them, Nikai, was staying very close to the fence. And so rather than tossing in snacks for him, I would just kind of hand feed him through the fence. And there's no particular reason for that. Nikai has realized that if he stays very close to the fence while Zephyr and Alewa are running after snacks, he gets snacks, but he doesn't have to work as hard for it. But it is also a way to ensure that he does get snacks. As the younger brother, sometimes his older siblings will outcompete him and kind of enforce their role as the older siblings and maybe take some of his food. So this way, everyone is getting snacks at a far enough distance from each other that hopefully there's no major aggression. Now, something I would like to try, if everyone would kind of bear with me for a moment, I am hoping we might be able to get Zephyr to howl. He does look quite hot. He's panting. Just as with dogs, panting is a way to cool off. but I'm hoping that he might be willing to share his lovely voice with us. But I will actually mute myself just for a few moments, because to try to get Zephyr to howl, I'm going to howl on my end. And when I'm this close to the microphone, if I'm howling, I might break some of your eardrums. So I'll mute myself on my end. And then if we are lucky enough to have Zephyr howl, I'll just unmute so you can hear Zephyr howling, but you won't have to hear the prep work that goes into it from me. So you would have heard just a bit of a tail end of Zephyr. I'll try it again. So these wolves will keep howling for quite some time. Sometimes they seem to howl for no reason at all, but sometimes, like now, it's usually kind of instigated by another sound. So in this case, it was me howling on my end. But we are also right next to the fire station. So sometimes fire trucks and the sirens cause them to howl. But a really great question about whether or not howls have meaning. They certainly do. Howls are a great way for wolves to communicate over long distances. In fact, over expanses of open terrain, wolves can actually hear howls up to about 10 miles away. But when they're this close to each other, so they can all see each other, they would primarily communicate using body language. So using their eyes, their ears, their tails, their teeth. So howls, when they're this close to each other, are often thought of as a way to socially bond. So it brings them closer together as a family. It's kind of like singing along to a song with friends and family. It's a lot of fun, and you really enjoy doing it. And the same can kind of be applied to wolves. But what's really fascinating is that every wolf has their own individual voice. So Zephyr's howl is quite high pitched. Nikai has a really silly, kind of goofy sounding howl. And Alewa actually has a deeper howl than both of her brothers. And we can actually identify which of these wolves is howling, even if we can't see them when they're howling. That's how fascinating their howls are. And the same extends to different species of wolf, even different canids or different members of the canid family. A recent study found that across the entire world, wolves howl in over 21 different dialects. And so I kind of like to compare it to how in the United States, we have some people who say soda and some say pop. We're meaning the same words, but slightly different in the words we use to describe them. And so the same can be applied to wolves, which is really fascinating. And then red wolves, as a completely different species altogether, do have very different howls. They are often quite yappy in tone. And so if anyone has been fortunate enough to hear coyotes howling, a red wolf howl sounds very similar to a coyote howling. And now before we start to move up to our red wolf enclosure and our Mexican gray wolf enclosure, I did just want to touch on one question that came in as to which member of this family is the leader or the alpha. And that's a great question. And there's actually a bit of a complex answer. So scientists used to use the word alpha to describe leaders in a wolf family. But then they realized that by saying the word alpha, they're really just describing the breeding pair or the parents. And so it doesn't really give away a lot of, really valuable information to say who's in charge. And so instead, scientists now prefer to call what would have been the alpha pair, either the breeding pair or the dominant pair. Now, this family of wolves, these ambassadors, kind of break the standard definition of a wolf family or a wolf pack because there's no breeding pair in here. It's a sister and two brothers, and they have all been spayed and neutered, so they cannot reproduce with each other. And so we don't quite see a breeding pair, but we do tend to see, if the situation calls for it, we'll see that Alewa and Zephyr will kind of put their feet down as the leaders in this group. But as the older siblings, it does make a bit more sense. They've taught Nikai pretty much everything they know. They've helped to kind of raise him and support him as he grows. So they've adopted kind of these roles of pseudo parents in a sense. But neither one of them would be a breeding wolf, which is what you would need in the wild. But with that, we are actually going to move to another part of our facility. We are very fortunate in that we sit on 32 acres of land, and most of that land is devoted to our wolf enclosures. So we have a total of 10 enclosures, and we have 39 wolves. And these enclosures, we're traveling up a ramp right now, these enclosures are very secluded. So unlike our ambassador enclosures, which are kept to be quite open, so visitors can easily see the wolves, the rest of our enclosures are very wooded and rugged. And that is so our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves don't get too accustomed to seeing humans. These wolves are part of 2 federally run recovery programs that are designed to release wolves into the wild. And one of the primary requirements for wild release is actually being afraid of people. And so this is one of our red wolf enclosures right here. And it is home to 2 red wolves, a male and a female. And they are both quite shy. They are both quite elusive. And that is actually exactly what we want. So if we look into their enclosure, you'll notice quite quickly, they have 2 of the same structures our ambassador wolves have. They have a log tower, they have a den, but they also don't really have very many open spaces. So again, a lot of trees, a lot of grasses and plants, and it is a bit easier to see things right now because we haven't had our spring bloom yet. But give it a few weeks and this area will be quite dense in terms of greenery. But these 2 red wolves in here are quite important to their endangered species as a whole. We have a male and a female. The male's name is Tyke, and he was actually born right back in that den in 2015. And the female that he lives with is named Lava. And Lava was actually born out in Washington State at a facility called Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. And that easily highlights or represents our work with other organizations through the Red Wolf Species Survival Plan, which is the captive portion of the overall Red Wolf Recovery Program. So we work with over 40 other facilities to house and care for red wolves in captivity. And the ultimate goal is to release them into the wild and help rebuild the wild population of red wolves. Because unfortunately, the wild population is at its lowest since red wolves were reintroduced into the wild in the 1980s. Red wolves are native to the Southeast. So historically from Texas over to Florida and then all the way up to New York, where we are. But overhunting, habitat loss caused their population to drop until eventually scientists were trying to find as many red wolves as they could in the wild. And they found a few hundred, but they brought those wolves into captivity, or what they thought were red wolves, and realized not all of them were actually red wolves. In fact, only 17 of them were, and only 14 of those 17 were actually able to breed and reproduce and have children. So all red wolves that are alive today descend from just 14 founders. So this population is critically endangered. And with only 10 known to remain in the wild today, there's still a lot of work to do to really help recover this species. Our center is actually home to 15 red wolves. And again, the goal is to release these wolves into the wild. The only place red wolves are found in the wild right now is North Carolina. It's primarily they are found really in two national wildlife refuges, the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge and the Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. And hopefully over the next few months, we'll actually see more red wolves released into the wild, which is crucial for their species. But for these red wolves, for Tyke and Lava, we're hoping they might welcome some pups this spring. We have had these wolves living together for just about a year and a few months. And at first they weren't huge fans of each other, which makes sense. We can't assume that every wolf will like each other. But we're hoping that this year we might be able to have them welcome some pups, which would be great for them as a family. Great to have them raise pups and work together as a family to do so. And then of course, great for their species as well. Because again, any pups born here could hopefully be released into the wild one day. And having them live with their families is really the best way or the best chance they would have. But you might also notice that these wolves are not going to be getting snacks during the program. And that's because we don't want to encourage them to associate people with snacks. So they are given their meals once a week to mimic about how often they would eat in the wild. I know once a week might not sound like a lot, but wolves are hunting prey that's quite large. And studies have found that on average, if wolves attempt hunting and chasing their preferred prey, every day, they're only going to be successful about 1 out of every 6 attempts. And so we feed our wolves on that cycle. So they're not expecting food more often than might be readily available in the wild. And so they will get roadkill deer. We do give them an entire carcass. It's great for their gut health. It's also great for their teeth, for pup development, learning what to eat. And also great enrichment. They can use the bones, the hide for play purposes after. So feeding whole carcass is really great for just their overall health, both physically and then, mentally in terms of being very stimulated. And I see a question from Nina. When we release wolves, do we release them in groups, like a family, or do we release individuals? That's a great question, Nina. So red wolves are not really the best species to discuss this with because a release of red wolves from captivity into the wild has not occurred since 2014. We are hoping, though, that because of a court order, the Fish and Wildlife Service will resume releases this year, in which case they are recommending either a cross foster, which is when captive born wolf pups are placed with a wild family of wolves that has had pups as well. And so that wild family will adopt and raise those captive pups as their own. And this does work quite well. It actually began with the Red Wolf program in 2002 and is now currently employed by the Mexican Gray Wolf program as the primary method of releasing wolves into the wild. But there's a slight challenge that with red wolves this year, the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the federal agency that oversees these programs, they do not anticipate having any wild litters of pups born. They did not have any in 2020 or 2019. And so if there are no wild litters, even if there are captive litters, a cross foster can't take place. But they are also looking into releasing pairs of wolves. So like you mentioned, kind of mini packs or mini families, it would be 2 wolves that would hopefully stay together and kind of establish a territory. Releasing individual wolves is really not the best. Wolves are social and family animals, and very rarely are they on their own for long. And so a wolf released on its own would most likely wander in search of a mate, and maybe would wander too far away, might have a very hard time finding food, could face other challenges. So again, releases of families are really the preferred method of release. But that's actually a really great way to segue to our Mexican gray wolf enclosure, because unlike red wolves who've not been released since 2014, Mexican gray wolves are currently, their release program is actually releasing wolves into the wild, either into Arizona and New Mexico in the United States or into northern Mexico. Primarily the Sonora or Chihuahua regions. But with Mexican gray wolves, if they're released in the US, it's through a cross foster. So that captive pup being raised by wild wolves. If it's Mexico, Mexico is actually conducting family group releases. So a group of wolves living in captivity might get the chance to be released together. And our center has actually, very lucky for us and for our wolves, we've been able to release 4 wolves since our center joined the Mexican Gray Wolf Recovery Program in the early 2000s. And one of our most recent, actually the most recent release we did was actually of a pup. So we did participate in a cross foster. We had a Mexican gray wolf born at our center in 2019. And she was cross fostered to a family of wolves in Arizona known as the Sapple Pack. They live in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. And we do have more information, pictures, things like that on our website. And so I can certainly send those to the library if they would like to post those maybe under the video when it's posted as well, just in case anyone would like to learn more. But when pups are released into the wild, they are given what's called a microchip. So it's not a tracking device, but it does serve to identify them if they are captured and collared in the future. So it's very similar to taking a dog, to the vet and giving them a microchip in case they're lost that can identify them. The same is done with Mexican gray wolves and pups, and really with adult wolves as well. All of our red wolves and Mexican gray wolves here are microchipped, just so we can confirm which wolf we have. If a wolf is leaving, a microchip can be scanned to confirm that, yes, this is the wolf we're expecting to leave. But if an adult wolf is released, yes, they are given a tracking collar, whether it's a GPS collar, a radio VHF collar, or a combination of both. That will allow wildlife officials to monitor their movements and kind of figure out where they're spending most of their time. And with Mexican gray wolves, there are about 186 living in Arizona and New Mexico. Mexico estimates they have about 35 wolves living in northern Mexico. Their release program began in 2011, releasing captive wolves into the wild. And the US portion has been releasing wolves since 1998. So, over a decade or so, more years than the Mexico portion of the recovery effort. But Mexican gray wolves, even though their numbers are significantly higher than red wolves, just by comparison, they do face a very significant genetic threat. So red wolves, as we discussed earlier, all descend from 14 bounders. Mexican gray wolves descend from 7. And so it really is quite important that wolves are released into the wild to really increase the genetic diversity. Right now, on average, all Mexican gray wolves living in the wild are as related to one another as full siblings. And so releases from captivity to the wild are a way to, introduce wolves that aren't fully represented in the wild population. And so that is another great way to increase that genetic diversity as well. Now this enclosure in here is home to 2 Mexican gray wolves, a male and a female. The male's name is Diego. He's actually one of our oldest wolves. He's turning 14 this spring, and he lives with a female named Valentia, and she's much younger than Diego. I believe she's turning 4 or 5. So much younger. But these wolves are a really great companion pair. They're not a breeding pair, but they do love spending time together. They're a really great group to watch, especially on the webcams. It's really wonderful to see how caring they are for each other. They'll sleep with each other. They'll whimper when the other one moves away. The only time they don't fully get along is when they're feeding. And so I think we can all relate to that, but they do get quite possessive over their food. But every other time they are loving to spend time together and really enjoying kind of being together as a family group, which is great. But now if we kind of look around their enclosure as well, you'll see it's very similar in structure to the red wolf enclosure. So really, again, meant to keep these wolves shy and elusive, because wolves do face many challenges in the wild. And unfortunately, human caused mortality is quite a significant threat. Red wolves have been poached quite extensively. It's one of the reasons their population is so low. But Mexican gray wolves also face significant poaching threats. In fact, the Fish and Wildlife Service is actually right now trying to find someone who in February killed a Mexican gray wolf that was, I think, just about a year old, and just left the body on the side of the road. And so they're trying to uncover any information about that, because Mexican gray wolves and red wolves are a federally endangered species. And so killing either one of them is a crime. Individuals can go to jail, they can be fined. But poaching is a real serious issue for wolves everywhere. Gray wolves, like our ambassador wolves, were actually just delisted or removed from the federal endangered species list in January. And so they no longer have protections across the US. It would fall to state wildlife agencies to protect them, if at all. And many states are choosing not to. In fact, Wisconsin, as some of you might have seen, it was making national news. Wisconsin held a wolf hunt once wolves were delisted. So they held a hunt in February. And the hunt was supposed to last a week. And they had set a quota of about 200 wolves, and 119 of those wolves were allotted for hunters to kill, and hunters killed 216 instead. And the hunt actually ended 3 days after it began. And so that's one of the other challenges facing wolves, is just that many people, unfortunately, believe it's okay to kill them. And it's not. There's no scientific reason to hunt wolves. And so at the root of it, it's trophy hunting. And it's something we speak out against, and it's something we encourage others to speak out against as well. But I know we are kind of approaching the end of our time. And so I do want to encourage, if anyone hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet, I know we've been kind of answering throughout the program, but if you would like to answer any questions, feel free to use the chat and type your question in there. If you don't have a question right now, but think of one later, you can certainly contact the Wolf Center via email or phone as a way to ask your question as well. But while anyone might be thinking of questions, I do want to encourage everyone, if you've learned, even just one thing about wolves today that you didn't know before, consider sharing that information with friends and family. Again, one of the biggest threats facing wolves is misinformation and lack of understanding about their important role, and really the human role in protecting them as well. And so you can certainly make a huge difference for wolves by telling other people about them. We do have a really great way for you to take action for wolves on our website. We list, various challenges facing wolves, and we give you representatives to contact or wildlife officials to reach out to. It's a really quick, effective, easy way, especially right now, to take action for wolves without leaving your house, which is quite effective. And I did see a question that came in asking how we're funded. So we are actually funded by people like you. Most of our income comes from the public, whether it's through donations or through program revenue. Admittedly, our program revenue is not what it once was just because of the pandemic. But we've been offering programs for schools, virtual programs such as this. So thank you to the library and all of you for your support of the center. But we also receive grants. We don't receive any federal funding. Even though we participate in 2 federally run programs, we are not given any money to do so by the federal government. And we do receive a very small state grant from the state of New York. But our funding is primarily from the public. And we do list our annual reports and our 990s on our website for anyone who might be interested in a more in-depth search. Okay, let's see if I missed any. And thank you to Elizabeth, who says she can't wait to visit. Yes, we are eagerly awaiting the day that we can offer programs for more people. We think, again, seeing wolves in person is really a great way to become inspired to save them. But hopefully these virtual programs are a close second. Really, with these red wolves and Mexican gray wolves not coming out at all right now, if anything, we had a better chance of seeing them today versus when people are here in person, just because they are so shy and so elusive. But it shows that even though I'm here by myself, I'm still scary enough that they have no desire to come out. But again, that is great for them in terms of release capability. If these wolves are coming out consistently right over to the fence, we actually would not be able to release them into the wild. And a question from Linda came in: are coy wolves part wolf? That's a great question. I think it's a very popular topic right now, especially in the surrounding area. So some of you might be familiar with eastern coyotes. They're the coyotes you've been seeing here for decades. And recent genetics research has discovered that some of these coyotes do have a bit of a mixed ancestry or mixed DNA, a mix of gray wolf, eastern wolf, western coyote, sometimes even domestic dog DNA. But scientists classify them as eastern coyotes, not coy wolves. And so while they do have some wolf DNA, it's not significantly large enough to warrant a different species status. But it can also be quite confusing because the term coy wolf implies that the animal you're discussing is quite literally half coyote and half wolf. And we don't have any wolves in the area for that to be the case. But scientists also discourage the use because there are actually areas of the world where you could have what is a coy wolf, a half coyote and a half wolf. And so it could just be confusing discussing that. There are two places where wolves and coyotes are known to hybridize. One of those areas is actually north of us in Ontario. It's Algonquin Provincial Park, where eastern wolves and coyotes have been recorded as pairing up and breeding together. They're of similar size, so they are able to hunt similar prey. They're able to make a life together more feasible. And then also in North Carolina, with so few red wolves left, red wolves have been doing what they can to survive. And sometimes that means pairing up with a local coyote. So in those two areas, there could actually be an animal that is half coyote and half wolf. And so for areas like us, the Northeast, scientists do discourage using the term coy wolf because by definition, it is not actually half coyote, half wolf. And so we prefer instead to use the term eastern coyote. We do actually have a really great eastern coyote program. Our wildlife outreach specialist offers a program all about eastern coyotes. And so that could certainly be another fun add to library programming if there's interest in the community. And I think we did get another question coming through. Oh, I see that someone actually visits in person as well, or has prior, which is wonderful. So thank you. Yes, we are very hopeful that we can resume our in-person programming soon. We offer a variety of programs and really enjoy welcoming members of the community because the community has been quite supportive of us. And so we like being able to give back through the various programs that we offer. Okay.
Regan, thank you very much. This is wonderful. Does anybody else have any more questions? Thank you. It's just a great program and wonderful work that you do. And so before we leave, just remind people to check out our webpage, keelerlibrary.org, and see all the other great programs that are coming up. And yes, we will talk to you about a program on coyotes. Absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Again, Carolyn, Kathleen, thank you so much for hosting us. And thank you to the library for your support and of the Wolf Center and the community as well. And thank you to everyone for joining. Again, we hope to see some of you in person in the future.
Thank you. Okay.